topic for today, refining the language of teaching yoga. And our guest host, Andrew McGonigle, has been studying anatomy for over 20 years, originally training to become a doctor and then moving away from Western medicine to become a yoga teacher, massage therapist, and anatomy teacher. He combines his skills and experience to teach anatomy and physiology and yoga teacher training courses internationally, and runs his own yoga anatomy online course, which we have some fun news about that. He has a few books out called Supporting Yoga Students with Common Injuries and Conditions, a handbook for yoga teachers and trainees, published in March of 2021, and his new book, The Physiology of Yoga, which was published June of 2022, so almost a year. Very exciting. He lives in Los Angeles with his husband, and if you'd like to learn more about Andrew and want to, connect with him, feel free to go to dr-yogi.com. As a reminder, this is recorded, and we will be sending it out on Monday with the recording, how to connect with Andrew, etc. Make sure to use the chat, as some of you have already been doing, for questions. We are very welcome to them. We are going to leave a few minutes at the end to try to get to a few. And with that, Andrew, thanks for joining us, and welcome to the beYogi community.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. So I have quite a reasonably strong Irish accent, so I hope all of you can understand me okay. It was really wonderful just to see everyone, from all over America, but also different places in Europe. So yeah, really excited for everyone to join. This is a topic that I've been really passionate about for some time. So I think language is incredibly powerful. So it's wonderful that so many of you are joining live and also catching up on the recording. So yeah, thank you. So without further ado, we're just going to launch into the little slideshow that I put together. And Lizzie, you can see this okay?
Yep, looks good.
All right, wonderful. So, let's start off with this quote, anonymous quote: "Be sure to taste your words before you spit them out." That resonated with me. Yeah, so, as I've said, this is a topic that I have been researching and having discussions with people about for many, many years. I like to use a little bit of humor here and there. So before we start, these are the aims and objectives for the next 60 minutes together. So I'd love you at the end of the session today to become clear on just how powerful language can be, not only in the yoga world, but in life in general. We're going to explore 7 top tips for refining our teaching language. We're going to discuss a little bit language around injuries and conditions, which is another topic I'm passionate about. Lizzie's mentioned my book. And then we're going to explore 8 anatomy or physiology topics that relate to how we cue and the language around that. And then, as we said, there'll be time for questions. And if there are more questions than we have time for, you're very free to email me, and I will share my email address with you all at the end. Okay, so some really wonderful quotes that I just wanted to quickly share with you that I've come across along the way. So, handle them carefully, for words have more power than atom bombs. Words have energy and power with the ability to help, to heal, to hinder, to hurt, to harm, to humiliate, and to humble. Throughout human history, our greatest leaders and thinkers have used the power of words to transform our emotions, to enlist us in their causes, and to shape the course of destiny. Words can not only create emotions, they create actions, and from our actions flow the results of our lives. So very, very powerful. Language creates reality. There's plenty of evidence to support the claim that if we change the way we view things, the things we view can change. I love that. The words we choose can either contain the capacity to heal or to have the potential to cause devastating and lasting harm. And words create worlds. Okay, so pretty amazing. So before we dive into the content, I just want to say to you that at some point today, there may be some things that I say and you think, oh my God, I've been saying this a million times for the last 5 years. Oh, I'm embarrassed, whatever. Just know that in every moment, we're all doing the best that we can do based on our current experience and on the current knowledge that we have. And the fact that you're all here wanting to know more about this topic is perfect. That's all we can ask from anyone, that you're willing to be open to looking at what you do, reflecting on it, and potentially refining it. Because in the past, like I've been teaching yoga for 14 years. At different points in that journey, I've realized, I really need to change the language, change the way I approach things. And honestly, at one point, I felt a lot of shame and I almost wanted to step back and stop teaching for a moment. So I just really don't want that to be other people's experience, where possible. So, teaching can be challenging enough. We don't have to give ourselves, a super hard time. Try not to be overwhelmed. If say there are 5 things that you pick up from today, I'm going to encourage you at the end to take one thing and apply that the next time you teach. And it might be to not say one thing, or it might be to say one thing differently, and then reflect on the experience, see how that was, and then maybe further down the line, choose another thing. Yeah. So try not to get overwhelmed. I highly recommend that you don't make big changes overnight. Yeah. So, just be pleased that you're here and that you have that willingness to learn. So a couple of things to help you get the most out of any learning experience is if you know about these different lenses that can get in the way of how we receive information. You may or may not have heard of these before. The first is confirmation bias. And there are a couple of ways to look at this. But one can be that when we're receiving information, we very quickly hone in on the information that already confirms our pre-existing beliefs. And we choose to neglect all this other information that adds context or that might even take us in a different direction. Okay, so notice that. Notice if there's a tendency to switch off, if there's a topic that I'm covering that you're familiar with, because I might say it in a different way or use different analogies or have a different way of applying it to the yoga practice. Just always be open. Even if something feels familiar, you might learn and get different context from it. Okay, there's another lens called cognitive dissonance. And this is when we're receiving information, we purposefully ignore information that contradicts our pre-existing belief. So there might be a few things that I say today that contradict something that you learned in your teacher training, or contradict something that a teacher that you respect says, or contradict something that you read in Yoga Journal, okay? Now, I'm not here just to push buttons. I try to come from an evidence-based, logical point of view. So notice if you kind of feel yourself harden or stiffen or feel this resistance to the information I'm sharing. See if you can just soften and see if you can take on board a different opinion. It doesn't mean I'm not going to force that opinion upon you, but it will hopefully help you to continue to find your own path along the way. And then the third lens is really fascinating. It's called the negativity bias. And basically, when we receive information that we believe to be negative or have a negative connotation, we're more likely to hear it, we're more likely to retain it, and we're more likely to share it with other people, which is one of the reasons why in yoga, you'll find that there are a lot of very popular cues that have a negative connotation. For example, in tree pose, we talk about not placing the foot against the knee to protect the knee. That actually doesn't make sense from an anatomical perspective. In 99.9% of cases, people are fine to put their foot against their knee. And then actually in a side plank, you're going to have way more lateral force in your knee than you would do in a tree pose, placing your foot against your knee. But we never talk about that in plank pose, but we kind of micromanage people in tree pose. So one of the reasons why that's become so popular is because it has a negative connotation. So it's just something to be mindful of as we go through. So a little cartoon about confirmation bias. I've got all the evidence I need. Okay. So I just want to, for a moment, look at things from a medical or therapeutic perspective. I imagine that most of you are not healthcare professionals, but language is important in every aspect of the world. So there is this research paper by Stewart and Loftus in 2018. You can use a search engine within Google that is called Google Scholar, and you could write in some of these details and you will probably have this available for yourself to read. So I'm just going to pull out some of the gems from this. So throughout the often complex and challenging process of musculoskeletal rehabilitation, the words that we use can have a significant impact on the clinical outcome. Words contain both the ability to heal and harm, as we've mentioned. Gaining an improved understanding of the frequently hidden influence that language can have on musculoskeletal rehabilitation is of paramount importance. Mounting research evidence indicates that physiological factors are more effective predictors of pain and disability levels than patho-anatomical factors. So basically saying that our psychological well-being has a bigger impact on our pain and disability than actual physical tissue damage, so quite fascinating. Human beings consist of muscles, bones, and tissues, but the words we use can have a profound influence on how people make sense of their bodies and how they interpret what they are experiencing. A term such as degenerative discs may sound mild and straightforward to a clinician, but catastrophic to a patient. Words are like toothpaste. Once out of the tube, they're impossible to put back in. It is time to consider whether the words we use form part of people's solution or part of their journey towards disabling vulnerability. Evidence shows, and there's the link, this is the reference they have below. Evidence shows that by rewording and broadening the context of medical language used with patients, clinicians may begin to liberate people from a life of unnecessary worry and disability. And again, you'll get the recording. You can put this into Google Scholar. You can take a look at this. So this is a summary, and it shows words to avoid in a medical context and alternatives. So just a few to look at. Chronic degenerative changes, that sounds a lot to someone, who isn't able to unpack that. Another way is to say normal age changes. Yeah. Negative test result, everything appears normal. Even the word negative obviously has a negative connotation. Super fascinating. Damage, repairable harm. Yeah. So really wonderful to see that there's big movement in the medical world about using more empowering language. I think it's really wonderful to see. And then this is a really fascinating study just to touch on. So there was a systematic literature review. This is the gold standard of medical evidence, okay? In 2015, found that the prevalence of disc degeneration, so in the intervertebral discs in your spine, in asymptomatic individuals, so people that were not experiencing back pain, increased from 37% of 20-year-olds to 96% of 80-year-olds. None of these people were experiencing back pain. So you could go for a scan for something unrelated, and the scan picks up that you have disc degeneration. The likelihood is that that information will be given to you, but not in a sensitive way. And really, that information needs to be given with a caveat that this is probably normal for someone in your age category. But if you don't know that, then you might start moving your spine less as a result, and therefore you end up in back pain. Okay. So this was a landmark study that really helped us to change the way we think about intervertebral discs. Another of my little cartoons. Okay, so let's dive in to the top tips that I have for you today. These are just suggestions for you. So invite rather than command, okay? So invitational language invites our students to reflect and follow the path that feels right for them rather than us directing their every action. Okay, so an example could be in Shavasana, you could say, you have the option to close your eyes if that feels available to you today. Otherwise, soften your gaze and look towards the ceiling. Yeah, so rather than just telling people close your eyes, you give them options. Okay, so a nice way to sum this up is give fewer cues and ask more questions. So in downward dog, how would it feel to step your hands slightly wider apart? How would it feel for you to bend deeper into your knees and lift your sit bones higher towards the corner of the room? Yeah. So instead of telling people what to do, invite them to take their own path and therefore have their own experience. When I started out on my teacher journey, I needed a level of control. And therefore I told people what to do. But I don't want to be an instructor. I want to be a teacher. Yeah. An instructor is someone that tells people what to do. A teacher is someone that helps to facilitate learning. Okay. So this is something that has really resonated with me and maybe it will resonate with you also. Top tip number 2. The why informs the how. Okay. So be clear on why you say what you say as a yoga teacher or why you do what you do. And if you're not so clear, it's okay not to say it or not to do it. Okay. Imagine that you use a cue. For example, you say to people, even like micro bend your knees, have a soft bend in your knees and a wide leg forward fold. Imagine you're teaching that time and time again. And a student who's really, curious says to you, oh, why do you ask us to do that? And you go, oh, because Dr. Yogi told me to do it, or because I read it on Wikipedia, or I saw it on YouTube. You've missed an opportunity to teach and to impart knowledge, but you've also missed an opportunity to build trust. So I would just say, really spend time thinking about what you say, and are you clear on the why behind that? Okay. And if you're not clear, then there are people like myself that can maybe help you to discover that. Okay. But if you're not clear about why you're saying something, I would just recommend that you don't say it. That feels more genuine and more empowering to actually not say something, or to then take a break from saying it and go and find out why and come back to it. A lot of people will say to me, what's the right way to do downward dog? And I'll be like, well, the why informs the how. Like, why are you teaching it? Or why are you practicing it? Why is it part of the sequence? And then that is going to help you to determine how you teach it, because you can do downward dog to get a nice stretch through the lower legs, but you can also do it to feel space in the upper body. Yeah. So, you can come at it from loads of different approaches, but if you understand why, that's going to help you to find the how. Okay. Top tip number 3 is avoid saying things like rest in child's pose, or even rest in downward dog. I've been told before, downward dog does not feel restful for me. Okay. What we're doing is, when we're saying that, we're making assumptions based on our own experience typically, because for me, child's pose is super restful even without props. It's just a natural position that I want to go into. I can fall asleep in that position. Okay. But that does not mean that for everyone, it's going to feel restful without props. Okay. So be really mindful of that. So just because a certain position or movement feels good for us, it doesn't mean it's going to feel good for everyone else. And just because something feels not so good for us, it doesn't mean it's going to be the same experience for other people. Saying something like rest in child's pose, it can set up the false expectation that child's pose is supposed to be restful without the help of props, which is not the case for the majority of people. And then people can end up feeling, oh, I'm not good at yoga. Okay. So there's definitely power there. You're telling someone what to experience rather than allowing them to have their own experience. And even if the pose is physically comfortable for someone, it might not feel emotionally comfortable. Okay. It might feel it might feel very claustrophobic for someone. Now, obviously, if you're teaching restorative yoga, the idea is to rest in child's pose, but we're going to need a ton of props to help all the different bodies in the room find the restful position. Yeah. So just be mindful. So to not tell people what experience they're going to have. Okay. And this comes down to basically our own personal bias. Okay, top tip number 4, avoid fear-based language. This is a big, big topic. I'm gonna talk about it as concisely as I can. Basically, we've heard about the placebo effect, which is when if you have a positive expectation, you're more likely to have a positive outcome. So if I was to give each of you a M&M and tell you that it was the latest high blood pressure medication, I would measure your blood pressure a week later and everyone's blood pressure would have lowered, even though it was just sugar, okay? But what most people haven't heard of is the nocebo effect, which means an otherwise harmless event can lead to a negative outcome if you have a negative expectation around that. So imagine that I gave you all an M&M, but I told you it was cyanide. You would all end up feeling ill, or most of you would end up feeling ill as a result, even though it was just sugar, okay? So the word protect that often creeps into our teaching language can have this impact, okay? So imagine that you're teaching a warrior pose, and your student feels very happy. They're thinking about what they're going to have for dinner tonight, because that's what we do when we're in a warrior pose. And you say to them, keep your knee above your ankle to protect your knee joint. I'm sure most of you have heard of a cue like that or similar, okay? They look down at their knee and their knee has moved beyond their ankle, which is a completely normal movement. Like if we couldn't naturally move our knee beyond our ankle without it being injurious, we wouldn't have been able to get out of bed this morning. We wouldn't be able to climb a flight of stairs, get out of a car. It's a normal movement, but the student looks down, their knee has moved beyond their ankle. They could actually end up feeling pain in their knee as a result of that, because they've been set up with a negative expectation. The word protect sends like a red alert to their nervous system, saying there is potential danger, be on the lookout, okay? So I would say completely remove the word protect. Now, it's fine to say in a traditional warrior, we keep the knee above the ankle. That's completely fine. It's not bad to cue that, but just don't go beyond that where you try to explain why, but do that incorrectly and in a way that could end up actually affecting someone. Because like with the knee, we say, you know, keep the knee in line with the ankle to protect the knee. In pigeon, people often say flex the foot to protect the knee. We say micro bend the knee to protect the knee. We say don't place the foot against the knee in tree pose to protect the knee. People end up thinking that their knees are fragile, and they are not. Our knees are anti-fragile. They respond positively to physical stress that is put on them. That stress does need to be progressive, okay? Because if too much stress is applied and the knee isn't prepared for that, yes, we can injure ourselves. But if load is applied progressively, the knee will strengthen accordingly. So where possible, remove the term protect from your language, or just don't go on to describe why you're making a particular cue, yeah? So say microbend your knees, but don't say that it's about protecting the knee joint. So this is a big, big one. And honestly, if you take one thing away from today, this is, for me, this would make me the most happiest if you took this away. Okay. So I've done these little myth or fact posts on my social media for quite some time. So your elbows will spontaneously combust if you keep locking them. It's another one, you know, microbend your elbows to protect your elbow. That's not biomechanically accurate to say that. Okay, so top tip number 5, avoid precision. No super detailed anatomical or alignment cue is going to work for everybody in a space. I used to be the most precise teacher you could ever imagine. Again, it was a control thing for me. I would tell you exactly how I want your hands to be placed in downward dog. They had to be exactly shoulder width apart. The index fingers needed to be parallel. I almost told you what degree each finger needed to be spread apart, you know? And in a large group setting, that's going to work for a couple of people, but each of us have an entirely unique body, okay? Just like our thumbprint identifies us, we could be identified by, say, our left hip joint. It is entirely unique to us. So therefore, we are each going to express every single yoga asana in our own unique way. And it's also going to depend on how we've slept and what injuries are happening to us and what we want to get out of practicing that pose today. There are multiple things, okay? So use alignment cues as a frame of reference, as a template, but be willing to go beyond that. So again, instead of telling people what to do and where to place their hands or where to place their feet, give them options. Ask questions. In Trikonasana, how does it feel to change the angle of your back foot? If the right foot's forward and the left foot's back, how does it feel to step your left foot slightly over to the left edge of the mat? Like, allow people to explore and let them find out for themselves what is their sweet spot in this moment today. So if you are using very precise cues, can you back off from that a little bit and give more room for exploration? Okay, this was a big one for me. This was something I had to really sit with for a long time. You know, your feet need to be hip width and parallel, y'all. What is that? What does hip width even mean? You know, for something. We'll revisit this a little bit later towards the end of the session. Okay, it's going to mean a different thing for each different person. Okay, so top tip number 6. It's pretty simple, but it can have a pretty profound effect. Speak in the positive. So, you know, focus on the actions your students can try rather than on what you don't want them to do. You know, so this might feel pretty simple, but for example, in a plank pose, instead of saying, don't let your hips sag towards the floor, you can say, can you keep that core engagement for another couple of breaths so that your pelvis, is in line with your shoulders and your heels? So focus on what you want people to do rather than what you don't want them to do. And look, the same thing goes to like the universe. If you're putting, a manifestation out there, focus on what you want. We've all been in that scenario, I'm sure, where we're like, oh my God, I don't want to date that kind of person again. I don't want to date that kind of person again. And then that kind of person walks into your life again. So instead of focusing on what you don't want, focus on what you want and teach what you want people to try, and rather than what you don't want them to do. Okay, so just something that might resonate with you. And I believe this is the last one. Yes, remove yourself from the practice. Your needs have no place in your students' practice. Okay, so it could be something as simple as, I want you to raise your arms above your head. Change that, because it's not about you. Okay. Also, by using language like this, it might feel quite innocent. I want you to do this. We encourage our students to practice to impress us rather than to practice for themselves. Okay, so let your ego, stay by the door. You can collect it on the way back out. Just don't make it about you. I think it's also definitely worth to take time to reflect on why you like to teach yoga, but also reflect on all the different reasons why people like to come and practice yoga, because often they don't align, and that's okay. But when you don't spend time reflecting on what other people want out of the practice, you can really try to push your agenda, and there can be a lot of frustration. Because for me, yoga is a very, very spiritual practice. It's a place I go to really go inward, to connect with myself, to center. That might not be what everyone wants to get out of the practice today. It's very valid to come to yoga to burn calories. There's way more to get out of it than just that. But when you recognize that not everyone is coming for the same reasons that you've showed up to teach, then again, you remove yourself from the practice, and you're going to be more compassionate with people. I believe as a result, there's going to be less frustration. So something I would highly, highly recommend. All right, we're halfway through. So I'm going to take a little sip of water, and then we're going to pivot slightly. So we're going to look for just a few moments on some language around working with a student who has an injury or a medical condition. So I recommend to not ask specifically about injuries and conditions. If you have an injury or a condition, put your hand up, I'll come speak to you. I personally would avoid that, because what you're doing is you are creating this assumption that you have this vast medical knowledge. And basically, when then someone tells you their whole medical history, that you're going to understand all that terminology. Okay, it's absolutely okay not to know. It's beyond the scope of a yoga teacher to understand all of this. What is more important is than the medical terminology is how that is potentially impacting the student today. So I would focus more on, how are you doing today? Are there things going on for you that might impact your practice? That to me is a more important question than a specific diagnosis, because you can also have two people side to side who have the exact same knee injury, but they have their own unique experience of that injury. One person might find that deeply flexing or bending their knee is painful. The other person might feel that that position is completely fine for them. Okay, so when we have an injury or condition, there isn't just like a blanket kind of list of rules, do this and don't do this and you'll be fine. It's all about the individual. So it's basically about having a dialogue and finding out, how is this impacting you today and how can I support you in that? Okay, so really we teach the student, not the injury. Okay, let that land for a moment. In the medical world, we say we treat the patient, not the condition. Okay, no two people will have exactly the same experience of a particular injury or condition. So just something to bear in mind. Okay, so if you're based in the UK, this is Mystic Meg. She is a very, very famous psychic in the UK. And actually, the term Mystic Meg has become part of the kind of vocabulary in the UK. She sadly died last year. So for anyone that's in America, I'm introducing you to Mystic Meg. You're welcome. So when it comes to students with injuries or conditions, don't try to predict the future. And what I mean by this is, I've done it in the past, I've heard other teachers. For example, a student comes to you and says, I have a prolapsed disc between L3 and L4. At one point, maybe 10 years ago, I would have said to them, oh, flexing the spine isn't going to be great for you. It's not going to feel good. So we're going to avoid deep flexion. I'm going to give you some modifications, okay? But the thing is, again, how do I know that deep flexion is going to feel bad for them? Like they are going to have their own unique experience. And it doesn't matter the fact that I have a medical degree or the fact that I have 14 years of teaching yoga behind me. I don't know anyone else's body better than they do. So what I would say is, rather than say, oh, this particular movement is not going to feel good for you, you can say, well, look, let's be particularly mindful of spinal movements today. It's really important to keep moving your spine as much as possible. But if there's a particular movement or, a particular position that really doesn't feel comfortable for you today, know that you always have permission to back off, to change that, to find a different position for yourself, to use props. Yeah. So don't tell people what experience they're going to have. It really comes back to the rest in child's pose idea as well. Yeah. So just don't predict the future for your students. Okay. And also be mindful of your language when a student tells you about their medical history. So an example is, someone could say, oh, I have a prolapsed disc. You could be like, oh my God, it's awful. Wow, I can't believe you even made it to class today. You are a miracle. Oh, what you're doing is you're potentially adding to this narrative that person's broken. Okay. Instead, you could say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. That's important information for me to know. How do you think I can support you today? Like, that is a very different approach to when someone discloses information to you. So just be mindful of that. Okay. So I know that I'm going quickly, but there's so much I want to share with you. I'm very passionate about this. So hopefully you're all understanding the accent and, keeping up with me. Okay. So we're now going to pivot and we're going to look at some ways we can refine the way we cue based on an anatomical or physiological perspective. Okay. So the terms flexibility and mobility are used a lot in the yoga world, the fitness world. There are multiple definitions for these words, and it really depends on the context, okay, and the source. But I'm going to give you a definition that is very easy to apply to yoga, okay? So let's look at our wrists for a moment. I invite you to do this at home with me. So if you place your forearms and the palms of your hands together, and then keeping the base of your hands touching, open your palms out, okay? So this is your mobile range. This is the range of wrist extension that is within your control, within the control of your actual nervous system and your muscles. Okay, so this is mobility. It's the active range. And then what we can do is we can use external force or body weight or gravity to take us further potentially into that position. So I've now moved further into a position of flexibility. So you can think of flexibility as moving beyond the active range into a more passive range using external force. Okay. Now, there's no good or bad here. Flexibility isn't good or bad. Mobility isn't good or bad. Really, we need a blend of both of those. We need to work on flexibility work and also mobility work. Okay. The pendulum swings. At one point, it was all about, oh, flexibility is going to, reduce injury rate, and then now it's mobility work is going to reduce injury rate, and the pendulum will continue to swing, back and forward with more and more research. Okay. So, but there is there can be times where it's helpful to understand the difference, because if you're only ever practicing or teaching plank pose where your wrists are directly underneath your shoulders, and you have people that have more of a Y shape here, then it means that you're constantly getting them to bring their wrist in a loaded position into a flexible range, okay? And that could be one of the reasons why certain people in your class are feeling sensation in the wrist, because if you're not doing a lot of wrist mobility work, working on the active range of movement, and you're always loading the wrist into flexion, then the wrist isn't going to be as healthy as it could be. Okay, so a little challenge for you at home. So if you're a Y shape, okay, I'm going to invite you to place your hands in prayer and lift your elbows so that they're roughly in line with your wrist. So you come into more of like a T shape. And then if you're a T shape, you can try to lift your elbows even a little higher. Now, can you keep your wrists in that position? And can you now take your hands apart? And you'll strongly feel the muscles along the back of your hand, along the front of your forearm, or the back of your forearm, working. Take another breath. Whew, and then release that. Give your wrist a shake. We'll do that one more time. So find the shape that works for you. And then can you take your hands apart? Whew, feel the work. Just really, think of the muscles along the back of the hand, the back of the arm that are working here. One more breath. Imagine you're enjoying this. And then give the wrist a shake. Now, here's the magic trick. When you do this again, most of you will notice that your hands have opened slightly wider. So by working on strengthening the wrists, we have actually increased the range of movement. Now, if you then forget to do that for a week, you'll go back to your typical shape. But if you add mobility and strengthening work into your regime, then the chances are that range will increase slightly. Okay. And then another thing to note when it comes to flexibility and mobility is, if you're working with a student who has osteoporosis, which is decreased bone mineral density, it's still important for them to move their spine through its range, but they have a higher risk of fracturing the vertebra in their spine. This is the big downside of having osteoporosis. So it's better with osteoporosis to focus on mobility rather than focus on flexibility. So for example, when you're doing a spinal twist, use the control of your muscles to move. You could even have your arms, crossed. Instead of using external force, instead of using your arm to lever you and pull you deeper into a twist. Yeah. So in a yoga context, it's better to work on mobility rather than flexibility. So hopefully with these terms, you will understand now, oh yes, this is now me in my mobile range. This is me in my flexible range. And it can then, help you in certain scenarios. Okay. So hopefully that is clear for everyone. Okay. So this is a big one, and this is controversial. Avoid sharing supposed benefits of practicing specific asanas. So I have written a book called The Physiology of Yoga. It's an evidence-based look at how yoga impacts each system of the body. Okay, and I'll show you the cover of it later in the session. Okay, so yoga in itself as a general practice, there are so many wonderful benefits to be had. We're all aware of those on a personal level, and there's also a lot of really good quality evidence that backs that up. But what we don't have is clear evidence on how specific poses can help us in specific ways. Okay, and we end up going down this rabbit hole where we're kind of explaining why we're doing these poses, and it just makes no sense from a physiological perspective. For example, I'm sure you've all heard, do this twist and it helps to detox the liver. That is just not the case. Detoxification is a cellular process. It's not a physical one. So even if you could squeeze the liver, which you can't, it's a dense organ. It is covered in slippery fat. Like even if you could get your hands on it, you would not be able to wring it out. It's not a physical process, the detoxification, it's cellular. Okay. And twisting does not even really increase blood flow to the liver. Okay. Detoxification happens in the background. For most of us, it happens perfectly well without us having to do specific actions. Yeah. Now, yoga as part of a healthy lifestyle can help the detoxification system to continue to work optimally. But what it's not going to do is boost that system. I hear a lot of people say, oh, yoga boosts the immune system. Well, actually, it doesn't do that. You wouldn't want your immune system boosted, because if it was boosted, you would feel permanently unwell. You would have runny nose. You'd have symptoms of a cold. You would basically have inflammation. A lot of people already have too much inflammation. Inflammation is part of the immune system response. We need it acutely. We need it in the moment, but we just don't need it to progress. There's actually evidence that yoga can down-regulate the immune system. So if you have persistent inflammation, yoga has been shown to help with that. So by saying, oh, yoga boosts the immune system, someone can think, well, if I practice yoga once a week, I'm never going to get COVID, and then they never take any precautions, so I would just be really mindful about, sharing, specific benefits. I even avoid things like, oh, downward dog lengthens the hamstrings, because what we realize with the latest research is that muscle doesn't shorten or lengthen over time. Now, yes, you can do downward dog and stretch the hamstrings, but it doesn't mean that the hamstring fibers become longer each time you stretch them. Okay. And also we say a lot of things like, oh, sitting shortens the hip flexors or it shortens the hamstrings. That makes no sense. If that happened, we would be walking around like a T-Rex because of the amount of sitting we do, if the muscle physically shortened. So I would personally avoid sharing specific benefits that are to be had. And you can read the book if you want more detail. Okay, this is a big one. This is controversial. Our spine cannot lengthen, okay? So there are no muscles that increase the space between the vertebrae, okay? But what happens is during the day, the intervertebral discs actually become less plump, and that's a good thing, because first thing in the morning, they are most plump, and they're actually least effective at supporting spinal movements, okay? Because there's very little room for maneuver. Okay, and we're actually at our tallest first thing in the morning. During the day, we become shorter because the discs become less plump and they become more effective at actually providing support for our movement. And then when you sleep and you're horizontal, the discs become more plump again. Okay, so we can't physically reverse that process by lengthening. What we can do is we can elongate the spine. We can grow taller by diminishing the curves of the spine. And that isn't necessarily a good thing to do all the time. That's very similar to slouching all the time. Okay, slouching isn't bad per se, but our spine has evolved to move. Our spine wants to move on a regular basis throughout the day. So if we're constantly in a yoga practice saying lengthen, we're actually creating stiffness. So let's do this for a second. Slouch in your chair and then see how freely you can twist side to side, okay? Then grow as tall as you can, feel your spine elongate, and then see how far you can twist side to side, okay? And then shake that out a little bit. Find a sweet spot somewhere between slouching and elongating, and then rotate. And I imagine that most of you will feel most free in this sweet spot in the middle. So I would say, rather than constantly getting people to lengthen their spine, can you get them to explore what a neutral position feels like for them today? And they're going to get the most freedom of movement from that position. So if you say lengthen your spine 30 times in a yoga class, can you say it 10 times instead? It's not a bad thing to say. The yoga police aren't going to rock up every time you say it, but maybe it's something you can say less of. And this is the exact same. So many people say, draw your navel to the spine, and many people go on to say to protect your lower back. That is not true. It is not evidence-based, okay? The spine has these amazing ligaments that run the length of it, at the front, at the back, and in the center. It has this amazing lattice, like plait-like formation of deep, deep muscles that are beyond our conscious control that layer it, okay? It then also has interabdominal pressure. It has fascia. It is interwoven with the rest of our body, okay? It does not need to be protected. Yes, a lot of people experience back pain, but that does not mean that a lot of people have issues with the actual physical makeup of their spine, okay? Our spines are not fragile. So the idea of drawing your navel to your spine and therefore protecting your lower back, it does not make sense from a biomechanical perspective. And again, it is fear-based, okay? The core muscles need to be able to engage. They also need to be able to relax. So rather than say cueing navel to spine in say a plank pose, I would use plank pose as an opportunity to draw people's awareness to their core. So say in plank pose, notice that your core has engaged. Your core is one of the groups of muscles that is helping you to keep your pelvis lifted off the mat. Yeah, so you don't have to say, oh, draw your navel to spine and plank, because by the fact that the pelvis is lifted off the floor means that the core muscles have already engaged. So I would rather get people to notice that their core is engaged rather than constantly cue it, okay? You can have the strongest core in the world and you can have 10 prolapsed discs in your spine. You can have the strongest core in the world and have no prolapsed discs. You can have the weakest core in the world and have prolapsed discs. You can have the weakest core in the world and no prolapsed discs. There is no actual correlation, you know, between the two, and there's no correlation between core strength and back pain. Now, working on your core can in some cases improve back pain, but it doesn't, but correlation is not causation. A weak core doesn't cause back pain. Okay, I know it's a big one, trust me. Okay, trust me on this. And there's a lot of other people that you know agree with this, and this is from an evidence point of view. Okay, very similar to the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is often over-cued. The pelvic floor does need to be able to engage, but equally it needs to be able to relax. So I personally do not cue pelvic floor engagement in a class. Some people have a hypertonic pelvic floor, which means that the muscles of the pelvic floor have too much excitability. Okay. And if you're constantly getting them to engage their pelvic floor through a yoga class, it can actually exacerbate that. And they can, you know, and as part of a hypertonic pelvic floor, it can exacerbate symptoms such as incontinence, pain during intercourse. Yeah, there's lots of different things. So what I like to do in a yoga practice is get people to become aware of the movement of their pelvic floor. So we have a respiratory diaphragm that sits below the rib cage, and then we have the pelvic floor diaphragm at the bottom. As we inhale, the respiratory diaphragm subtly flattens, and so does the pelvic floor diaphragm. And as we exhale, both dome. So inhale, flatten, exhale, dome, okay? So I like to get people in a position either seated or maybe even in a child's pose or in hero pose. And it can feel good to have a prop like a blanket in contact with the pelvic floor and just do some meditation. You know, inhale, notice the pelvic floor subtly lower. Exhale, notice the pelvic floor subtly rise. Like that to me is way more valuable than constantly getting people to engage their pelvic floor. It comes back to the awareness. Okay. Okay, so a couple more, just aware of the time, got 10 minutes. So we so often hear shoulder blades away from the ears that it can be easy to imagine that lifting the shoulder blades up to the ears is a bad thing, okay? But I'm going to invite you to do something for a moment. Actively draw your shoulder blades away from your ears. Keep the shoulder blades drawing down and lift your arms up and out to the side, okay? And you'll probably notice that the movement feels a little bit stuck. Now give the shoulders a shake, let the shoulder blades do whatever they want to do and lift the arms. Okay. Now, what you're experiencing in the second example is what's called the scapulohumeral rhythm. Okay. The shoulder blades actually make up so much of the movement of the arms themselves. Okay. So if you draw the shoulder blades down and keep them down and you lift your arms out to the side, once you reach around the horizon, okay, that from hands by your side to the horizon, that comes from the shoulder joint. And then as you lift your arms higher, that comes from the shoulder blades rotating upwards. So we need to allow the shoulder blades to facilitate the movement of the arms. Okay, so it's not bad to say draw your shoulder blades away from your ears. That in certain cases that can be helpful. But if you are going to say it, have it as one of your last cues. So if you're moving into downward dog, let people find the arm position that works for them. And then if you want to, they can experiment. How does it feel to draw the shoulder blades away from the ears in this position? But if the first part of your cueing is draw the shoulder blades away from the ears, that's actually going to restrict the way that the arms themselves move. Okay, so just something to bear in mind. And then, okay, I think this, okay, I'm going to do, yeah, I'm going to see how many more of these I can do. I might have to wrap up soon. Okay, so I invite you now to reach your arm out to the side and look down the length of your arm, and you will notice that your arm is not straight. Okay, we have what is called a carrying angle, where the forearm deviates away from the axis of the upper arm. We have this for two reasons. First, when we walk and we swing our arms, this stops the little finger hitting into our thighs, okay? And then also, you'll notice that the angle of the elbow is oblique, so that when you bend the elbow, the hand moves towards the mouth. This helps us with articulating and with feeding ourselves, okay? So very clever part of our evolution to have this. Now, let's apply this to chaturanga. Okay, so let's do a seated version of chaturanga, and I invite you to do this at home with me. So imagine you're in a seated plank with your hands in front of you and have your hands shoulder width apart roughly. Now, as you bring your arms back, because of the carrying angle, the elbows naturally move out to the side of your waist because your arms are not straight. Now, in yoga, we don't like people to do that. It doesn't really make sense why. It's actually completely fine anatomically to do that, but it's basically too long a story to go into. But then what we do is we get people to say, oh, hug your elbows into the side of the waist, yeah? Now, the main muscles that do that are the pectoralis major and the latissimus dorsi. They also internally rotate the shoulder joint. So as we squeeze in, the shoulders then tend to roll in. We don't like that as teachers. So then we get people to broaden across their collarbones. We're basically telling our students to do all these conflicting things, okay? A more simple approach is to either have the hands shoulder width apart and don't worry about the elbows going slightly wide of the sides of the body, or to accommodate the carrying angle, step the hands slightly wider. And then as you lower into chaturanga, the elbows will move directly behind you, okay? So this is just an example of human variation because this angle is going to be individual to each of us, and also to have this the framework of okay plank, hands are shoulder width apart. Well, also we can step the hands slightly wider, we can turn the hands out slightly, and if you were one of the Y shape, you can also step your hands a little beyond your shoulders, and that actually might feel more comfortable for your wrists. Okay, so be willing to explore. Okay, I'm going to very, very quickly talk about the Q angle, okay? Some of us are bow-legged, some of us are knock-kneed, some of us have quite kind of vertical alignment of our leg bones. We're all on a spectrum somewhere. There's no good or bad here unless you're at a real, extreme end of the spectrum, okay? And because of this, we sometimes, like if you're knock-kneed, then in a high lunge, your knee is naturally going to gravitate to the inside of your ankle, and that's okay. If you're slightly bow-legged, your knee is going to gravitate slightly to the outside of your ankle. That is okay. We don't need to correct this. I would make sure that people feel active through the foot. So can they lift and spread the toes? Can they spread the weight evenly across the 3 corners of the front foot? Can they engage the muscles of the hip? Yeah. And then let the knee position itself wherever it needs to. Okay. It's more about how the knee feels rather than what it looks like, because we each have our own unique anatomy. I know I'm going through this like super, super quickly. I explore all of these on social media and blog posts in the course that I run, so, this is just a little, taster for a lot of you. Ah, that was a lot. Okay. Take a moment, breathe. Be kind to yourself. So I'm going to challenge you to refine or omit one cue per class that you teach and take time to reflect on that experience. You do not need to change everything overnight. Okay. Get in touch with me. My website has a blog. I run live online workshops. I run in-person workshops, mainly in the UK. Email me if you have questions about today. I can point you in the right direction. I can point you towards a blog post that I've written. Okay. These are my books. You can get them anywhere. You can get them from a local bookstore. They'll order it for you. You can get them on Amazon, whatever you want to do. That's all on my website. So some of these books might interest you. And then I run a 30-hour online training in anatomy. So if what we're talking about today really intrigued you and you want to learn more, it's a great course. I'm really proud of it. We have people from all over the world taking it. It has lifetime access, and you have a live Q&A with me every 5 weeks. So you really feel supported. It's a lovely community. It's great value for money. Because you're doing this webinar, I'm offering you 15% discount. So you can use the code beYogi15 to receive that. And thank you so much for joining me. So let's take a few questions, Lizzie. I know we're nearly at the 1 hour mark.
Yeah, there's definitely a few that came in. We won't be able to answer them all. The first question is, and Andrew, we can chat about this via email, but do you have, slides that you'd be open to sharing about this topic?
No, I'm very happy to share this slide presentation with you.
Amazing.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah, so if you could send that over to me, I can include it in our email for everybody. So
and I would just ask everyone just to not, just keep it to yourself, to not, because this is my, I've spent a lot of time putting this together. Yep. So keep it to yourself, but yeah, you can reflect back on the slideshow for sure. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, that would make a lot of people happy. I know they're like, this is so much good information. So a few questions came in around wrist. Like we talked a lot about wrist strengthening exercises and things like that. So Jen asked, will the wrist strengthening exercise help with students who have carpal tunnel?
Potentially. What I'll say is strengthening work and mobility work, it'll never do any harm. Our body loves that. So it's definitely worth doing it as an experiment to see if it helps. And just also know that you don't have to solve everyone's problems.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some of your yoga therapists, maybe some of you have done more in-depth training, but many of you are going to be regular yoga teachers. Just don't try to solve everyone's problem. It's often beyond the scope of a yoga teacher. But yeah, I would say strengthening work, mobility work, it's never going to do any harm. It's always worth blending it in and then seeing what your experience is. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, and one just came in that I think would be a good closer, but how do you balance giving options versus precise instructions in a beginner's class?
Yeah. It's a really, really good question. I will basically say, this is a framework for downward dog, and we'll talk about what that could look like. Yeah. But then we'll say, I always talk about we're all unique. So we're all gonna find our own expression of that. So I will give a framework, but then I will invite people to explore, beyond that. Or I'll say traditionally, this is the setup for this pose, but feel free to explore beyond that.
Awesome.
That can be a nice way. Or I might even say that in general, at the start of a class, and say, look, I'm going to teach a framework for a pose, but it's up to you to, find what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to guide that,
Amazing, Andrew. This was such good information, and I can't wait to send out the recording so people can watch it again, look at the slides. Again, I'm going to just mention that 15% off will be added into that email. So definitely take advantage. If you really liked what Andrew was talking about, check him out on Instagram, website, all of the good stuff. The recording will be sent out on Monday. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your, what is it, Wednesday?
Can I answer 2 quick questions?
Yep, go for it.
Yes, all my courses are with Yoga Alliance, so you can get points. Even if you want one for an hour point for today, you can email me. I can give you a certificate. And then really quickly, what's the reason to microbend the knee if not to protect them? When you microbend the knee, it's more easy to engage the leg muscles. So when you hyperextend the knee, it's harder to engage the muscles. So that's a good reason why we microbend. And there we are.
And there we are. Alrighty, have a good one, Andrew.
Thank you, Lizzie, for facilitating.
Alrighty. Bye, everyone. See you at the next one.
Take care. Thanks for joining.